Chapter 50. 1 year after we arrived in Wuhu, Yiding graduated from high school and was sent down to the countryside as an educated youth. There were limited choices each student might make as to where he would be sent. My parents tried to learn something about the living conditions in different areas of the province in order to help Yiding find a good commune. Yiding, for his part, tried to comfort my parents. "I'll be okay," he assured them. "I learned how to work in the fields in Gao village." But they were worried. They signed him up for a commune in Dangtu County, 30 miles south of Wuhu. When he departed, I was sad for him. I knew that the same fate awaited me in a year. I didn't go to see him off. It was just too painful for me to say goodbye at yet another official departing ceremony. I completed my final year of high school, and on March 23, 1976, I was sent down to the countryside with the other educated youth. I was 17. There was no graduation ceremony. The day the academic year ended was like any other day. The political atmosphere at that time was a bit stricter than the previous year. I did not have a choice. All I knew for sure was that I was going to Jingxian County. No other details were provided. I stayed awake the night before I left. I packed a small suitcase with my clothing and a few books. My parents and Yichun came to see me off. It was a beautiful morning. The sky was blue, the sun was shining. The clouds were white. The parting ceremony was like all the others I'd seen. The only difference was that I was the one leaving in the long parade for a glorious future in the countryside. There was a rally at the city bus terminal. A dozen weathered and rusted buses were lined up waiting for us. Red paper flowers were tied to them. The flowers symbolized honor and celebration because this was supposed to be a great patriotic undertaking. Some parents were already there when we arrived, helping load their children's luggage. A group of students from some middle school half-heartedly pounded on gongs and drums. Many parents were crying and holding their children's hands. I tried to put on a face and not cry, and struggled to find something appropriate to say. I told my little brother that since Yiding and I were both gone, it was his responsibility to care for our parents. I reminded him to be a good student and go to market for Mama every day. At 8 o'clock, the mayor of Wuhu appeared on the stage. He was a short, fat man with thick glasses. He wore a perfectly pressed gray mall suit and a little matching cap. He spoke with a heavy local accent. He gave a brief speech about what an honor it was to be sent down, to be able to answer the call of the great helmsman. He proclaimed, "It's a great thing. You should put down your roots in the countryside and carry out the revolution there for the rest of your lives." When he was finished, there was a burst of singing and the renewed clatter of drums and guns. The bus drivers started their engines. The air filled with fumes. As we lined up to board, the sky quickly darkened, and a light rain began to fall. People covered their heads. I was surprised at how emotional I became. I broke down and began sobbing as I said goodbye to my family. Mama decided to ride the bus with me because she was worried about where I was going and what might happen. She climbed aboard behind me, but the party cadre was waiting for us in the aisle. He spotted her right away, trying to conceal herself in the crowd. He shouted, "No parents are allowed, only the educated youth." Mama pleaded, "My daughter is not in good health. Please let me accompany her." The cadre shoved her down the steps and out the door. There were 40 of us on the bus. The noise from the singing and drums and guns outside was deafening. Everyone gathered around the buses, waving, screaming, and crying. I looked at my mother and father and brother and waved weakly as we pulled away. Some of the parents in the crowd ran alongside, reaching up to touch their children one last time. Bang on the side of the bus, trying to keep us as long as they could. As the bus gained speed, they fell behind. I pressed my face to the window and continued waving and sobbing as my parents and my brother disappeared in the exhaust and the dust. I slumped in my seat and was jolted from side to side as the bus carried us through the city and out into the countryside. The party cadre sat stiffly in the seat behind the driver and started dispassionately out the window and stared dispassionately out the window. In the countryside, the road was rutted and full of potholes and sometimes sloped from side to side. The driver swerved back and forth and slowed and accelerated like the captain of a small junk navigating troubled water. The springs were useless in protecting those inside from the ravages of the road. Each time we hit a pothole, the entire bus trembled and shuddered and sounded like a can filled with nails. The students clutched the sides of the seats in an effort to steady themselves. My queasy stomach couldn't take it, and before long, I felt my breakfast rise into my throat. I yelled to the cadre that I was going to throw up and staggered into the aisle. The cadre told the driver to open the door, but not to slow down or stop. I stumbled to the front of the bus and descended the stairs. I stood on the bottom stair and grasped the side rails and leaned out the door and vomited. Another girl, who was the only other student from my school on the bus, ran to stand behind me and hold me around the waist to prevent me from tumbling out the door. The cadre watched with contempt. I thought that I'd never return to my family. I'd be peasant, like the peasants of Gao village, for the rest of my life. Wuhu was not the escape I once hoped it would be. It was merely a brief interlude between miseries. I knew that the life of a peasant with a black family background was not worth living again. I wanted to jump out of the bus and fall under the rails and end everything. I leaned a bit farther out the door, and my schoolmate tightened her grip around my waist. "Careful," she warned. "You don't want to hurt yourself." When I turned and looked up at her, I saw tears in her eyes and thought she must be reading. 3 hours later, we stopped outside a small town. The cadre announced, "We're stopping here for 1 hour for lunch." Everyone filed past me and stepped outside, but I could hardly move. Everything hurt. I lay down across the rear seat of the bus to rest. When the other students returned, the cadre stood in the aisle and held up a large envelope. "Listen, everyone," he shouted. "This is the list of your names and the communes to which you have been assigned. The bus will make drop-offs at each commune along the way. So, pay attention. I want no mistakes." He began reading. This group was dropped off at this commune, and that group at that, and so on. I didn't hear my name. The others appeared to recognize the name of the places to which they were being sent. Those in the same group grabbed hands in congratulations that they would be together. When the cadre was finished, I said to my schoolmate, "I didn't hear my name. Would you ask him where I am assigned?" She moved to the front of the bus and asked the cadre, "Can you tell me what Wu Yimao is assigned?" Where Wu Yimao is assigned. The cadre went down the list and seemed puzzled. He thought for a moment and said, "Ah, yes, I remember now. She is the one nobody wanted. She has family problems. She's from a black family." I'd been an active member of the Chinese Youth League, Communist Youth League, for 2 years. I'd participated in all activities, earned good grades, and been a class cadre. I'd almost forgotten that the shadow of my family background was forever following me. At his words, I remembered, and the remaining pathetic residue of my youthful hopes and illusions was immediately and thoroughly dissolved. The past sucked me down like quicksand. It was decided at the last minute that she would go to Xiyang Commune, Luo Village. the Kadri said. It's deep in the mountains, a good place to bury someone of her kind. We will not have to worry about her anti-revolutionary activities because she'll be in such a desolate area. His sharp words were tipped with poisonous glee. The other students stared at me as if I were a spy in their midst. I felt like a character from one of the popular operas of the time, a true enemy of the people, working from within. Now, I had been identified, and they were exiling me to the remotest mountain area. Poetic punishment for a spy. Again, I felt the urge to jump from the bus and end my life. But I had neither the energy nor the courage. The bus stopped again and again, and the students stepped off in twos and threes, carrying their luggage. Finally, I was the only student left. The bus continued on for 15 minutes before the Kadri told the driver to stop. He turned to me and said gruffly, "You, get out here." I picked up my bag and stepped out and collapsed to the ground. The Kadri strode to a nearby building. It was a small, single-story brick structure with a gray tile roof. He found a man inside and brought him out. "This one is for you," the Kadri said, pointing at me with his foot, as if selling a pig in the black market. The man who accompanied him was only about 4.5 feet tall. He was slim and wiry, and had the stub of a cigarette in his mouth. His eyes bulged out, and the few teeth he had were black. He walked up to me and said, "I am production team leader Huang of Luo Village." His accent was thick, and I could hardly understand him. He picked up my bag and started to walk away. "I'm so tired," I said to him. "Can I rest for a minute? I've been throwing up all the way here." "No," he answered without looking back. "We can't wait. We have a long way to go. If we don't get to the village by dark, we may run into a tiger." I thought he might laugh, that he was trying to scare me, but he didn't stop, and he didn't laugh. I struggled to my feet and whispered weakly, "Well, let's go. Let's go then." I followed him up the winding mountain path. He was clearly accustomed to climbing the steep trail. He moved deftly, and I had a hard time keeping up with him. Now and then he looked down at me and spat on the ground. "Useless damned city girl," he said. "Why did they send you to me? What in the world am I going to do with you? Another mouse to feed." With every twist in the path, he cursed me and cursed his fate. As the sun settled beyond the mountain peaks, the lush greens and blues of the landscape faded to a monochromatic dull copper. The outcropping of steep rocks shimmered above broad paths of russet undergrowth. The silhouettes of trees sprouting from bare rocks stood like a scattered column of attentive sentinels ascending into the crowds. I climbed wearily into the thinning air, pausing often to gasp for breath. I felt no sense of wonder or exhilaration at the gorgeous scenery around me. I was thinking only that every step I took separated me further from the rest of the world, from my friends, from my family, from a happier future I'd imagined for myself in the city. Everything I loved faded in the valley far below. After a 2 hours ascent, we passed through a low-hanging cloud, and as we emerged from it, I saw the village laid out on the flat brown terrace of land. "We're here," Team Leader Huang called to me. He waited for me to catch up with him and then led me into a small mud hut and dropped my suitcase on the dirt floor. "Cui Hua, I've got someone for you," he shouted. "Who is it?" came a sleepy reply. "It's Team Leader Huang," he answered. A young woman appeared. She was about my age and height. She was slim and had a long, narrow nose and white eyes. She was combing her hair. She looked at me curiously and said, "I am Sun Cui Hua. I'm educated youth from Jing County. And who are you?" I introduced myself, relieved to have a companion here. "We did not know you were coming until yesterday," Team Leader Huang said. "We have to go to the commune headquarters tomorrow and get you a bed. Tonight, you sleep with Cui Hua." And with that, he left. I sat down on my bag. "Oh, are you hungry?" Cui Hua asked. "I can get you something to eat." "Not hungry," I sighed. "I'm tired, and I don't feel well. I need to lie down." There was a single wooden board on 4 legs that served as a bed for both of us that night, and there was a thin blanket. I got in and squeezed close to the wall. Within seconds, I was in a deep sleep. Team Leader Huang awakened us the next morning. He was with another man from the village. "We're going to the commune headquarters," he said. "The government has given us rations for each educated youth. You get a sickle, a hoe, a shovel, and a shoulder pole, along with your bed." "Must I go with you?" I asked. "I'm still tired and sore. My legs and back hurt. I can hardly walk, Team Leader." "Oh, you don't have to go," he said. "You'll just slow us down anyway. You don't have to work in the field today either." I thanked him for his understanding. Much to my surprise, the men returned about 3 hours later. They carried my supplies and the materials to make a bed for me. "Look what we found on the road," Team Leader Huang shouted from a distance and pointed back down the mountain. I strained to see the path below. A lone figure, a woman, trudged toward us. She looked up at us and waved. It was my mother! I rushed down the path to her. "How did you find me?" I asked breathlessly. "After I was pushed off the bus," she said, "I tried to find a way to follow you here. But nobody was coming this way. The public bus would have cost me 3 yuan. I tried to find a free ride. Finally, a friend of a friend of a friend said she knew someone at the post office, and he let me ride on the mail truck. I came here just like a package. I asked for you at every stop, and people kept telling me, further up the mountain, further up the mountain." She was exhausted from the climb, but I was also very excited to see me. But she was very excited to see me. The 2 men hung a bamboo partition at one end of the hut to give me a room. Cuihua, Mama, and I put my new bed together in my new room. We talked most of that day. Mama said life would be hard here. She cautioned me to be careful and to do what I was told. "The times will change," she said. "Someday this will end. Someday." And when that happens, our new lives, our real lives, will begin. I know it's hard for you to believe this, but you must never give up hope. Never. Cuihua and I listened to her words, catching fragments of faith from them. "Be sure you eat enough food," Mama said, "and don't work too hard." We cooked rice, and the 3 of us ate dinner together. Afterward, Mama and I sat outside and watched the sunset. She asked me many questions about my journey. I didn't want her to worry about me, so I said it had been uneventful. She watched my face as I spoke. I was not sure she knew I wasn't telling her everything. "Mama," she said, patting my hand, "there is something you need to know before I leave you here. Do you remember what happened when you were in the hospital in Hefei?" "I remember. You told me never to talk about it. Have you?" "No. After I arrived and saw your condition, I baptized you. Do you know what that means?" "No. I only remember it was wet." "Mama," she said, and then lowered her voice to a whisper. I'm Christian, and you are too. I don't know what that is. How did you become one? When I was 14, my brother and sister, your third uncle and second aunt, took me to a church with them. They had become Christians years earlier. They attended a Catholic university in Beijing and were converted there. At first, I thought it was just fun. I'd never seen or heard anything like it before. I was enthralled by the ritual, the chanting and the singing, and the incense and the statues. I returned with them the following week. They explained what it meant. They taught me that there is a God, and that there is a son of a God and a mother of God. They showed me that there is another world. I know this is hard for you to understand, particularly now, in this world. But you need to know these things. They'll help you stay strong. I listened intently and was moved by her solemnity. When I was 15, she continued, I was baptized by a priest in Tianjin. A priest normally baptizes. But when I saw you in Hefei, I thought I was going to lose you. So I baptized you myself. And that's how I became a Christian, Mama? Yes. Why? Because I want someone to watch over you when I'm not with you. Because I don't want to lose you ever to those who pulled us apart and tormented us. Because there is a God who watches over you. Why? Why is this a secret? Why can't I tell anybody? Because they hate us and fear us, the Communist Party. After the revolution, they began arresting Christians. Did they arrest you? Not me, because I was young. But they warned us to stop believing in our God. They said we were poisonous. They said we were prisoners of superstition. They told us, wash your minds and get rid of your religion. In 1951, policemen came to our house in Tianjin, the same house where you lived with Grandma when you were a little girl. They ransacked the house. They took away your second aunt. They beat her and put her in prison. She is still there today. She refused to deny her God. She's been in prison for 25 years because she is a Christian. What if they find out about me? I asked. I'm in enough trouble already. They won't. Nobody knows. But you must never confide in anyone else. I won't. Remember, she said, if you ever feel you need help, Mama, if you become sick, if you should think that you can't go on living, remember what I'm saying. There is a God. close your eyes and ask Him to help you. He will. Where is He? He's up there in the mountains with you, and He's down in Wuhu with us too. Until you learn more, just whisper, God, help me. Oh, I really didn't understand what she was saying. I gave her a perplexed look. She read my face and said, someday this will make sense to you, but for now, in this chaos, even though it's hard to grasp, you need to have trust and faith. I will, I assured her. In the morning, I received permission from team leader Huang to walk Mama down the mountain. The bus came, and she climbed aboard. I waved goodbye until she was out of sight. Then I felt completely lonely and lost. God, help me, I said. I waited for a voice or sign. There was none. I adjusted to the cycles of village life. Because we were in the mountains, the sun did not appear over the eastern peaks until 9 in the morning, and it set about 5 in the afternoon. The days were short and the nights were long. Each morning, Cuihua and I boiled a cauldron of water and filled a thermos. We cooked rice for breakfast. We had rice and hot water for lunch and dinner. This was our daily diet. The lack of iodine in the mountain springs and the restricted diet. Vegetables did not grow well at that altitude, meant that many of the villagers suffered from what they called big neck disease or goiters. Most had prominent or bulging eyes, another symptom of dietary deficiencies. I worked with the villagers every day in the terraced fields from dawn until dark. We planted rice, picked tea leaves, and chopped down trees and bamboo. I learned to carry a long stick and swish it through the underbrush in front of me on the way to and from work in order to scare away the poisonous snakes that infested the region. One of the field snakes was called a 5-step serpent by the villagers, indicating that anyone who was bitten could take only 5 steps before dropping dead. Another field snake was a bamboo leaf green serpent. This one blended into the bamboo and might strike from either above or below. Its bite was just as deadly. Only when it rained or snowed heavily were we allowed to stay home. Weeks blended into one another, everyone pretty much like the last. And I always asked God for rain and snow. One rainy day, while I was washing my soiled clothing in a big wooden basin, I sensed someone standing behind me. I assumed it was 翠华. I turned and noticed a pair of high-topped white sneakers. These were unusual, since most of us in the mountains went barefoot. I looked up and saw a nicely dressed and handsome young man smiling down at me. His face was bright red. He was blushing. I stood up. My hands were wet and soapy. I didn't know what to do with them. 翠华 came into the room and saw the visitor and said, 巫一毛, this is Teacher Zhu. And Teacher Zhu, this is 巫一毛, the new educated youth from your hometown, Wuhu. Hello, Teacher Zhu, I responded. Please, don't be so formal, he replied. Call me Zhu Yiping. Hearing him speak in the Wuhu dialect sent a shudder of delight through me. Here was someone from home. I wrung my hands together nervously. I heard there were some new educated youth here, so I dropped by to say hello, he said. Are you getting accustomed to the altitude and the mountain life? Everything here is up and down, he laughed. I was uncomfortable talking with a young man my own age who stood so close to me and spoke so informally. I'd never had a conversation like this before. I had difficulty hiding my uneasiness. How long have you been here? I finally managed. 4 years, he answered. 4 long years. And you are a teacher, not a peasant? Yes, he said. That's an interesting story. I'm from a black family. I was sent here to be a peasant. Some time ago, while I was working in the field, a small tractor driven by a peasant backed over my foot. He came close to killing me, but he only broke several bones. I stayed in bed for 2 months. It took me several weeks after that to walk without pain again. Why didn't they send you home as a handicapped person? I asked. I thought that was the policy. He laughed. Oh, you're new here. Believe me, if injury were a way of getting out of here, every educated youth in the mountains would be standing behind a tractor. A broken foot or a broken leg is a small price to pay for going home. But no way. Sorry, they know that. They just wait till we get better and then give us another assignment. Yimao, they're never sending us home. They waited until I could walk and saw I'd be no use working in the fields, so they assigned me to the school. He shuffled back and forth across the room and showed me that he still favored his left leg. See, he said, it never healed right. But up here, nobody cares. His words unsettled me. I once more sensed the dread that I would never leave this place except by death. Zhu Yiping remained and talked with us the rest of the afternoon. He started back to his village before darkness set in, waving his snake stick in front of him. He still had a slight limp. "How do you get around on these mountain trails?" I called after him. He turned and smiled and shouted, "Badly." We kept a large water jar inside the hut, and we had to fetch water for it every few days. When I first arrived, Cui Hua fetched it for both of us from a nearby well. Soon I was taking my turn getting our water. I carried 2 wooden buckets to the well, which was about 20 feet deep. I could not see the bottom. I was afraid I might fall in. I knelt at the edge and braced myself on the rock wall surrounding it. After I threw down the bucket, I pulled it from side to side with a long rope, but I failed to fill it with water. I pulled it back up, uncertain what to do. Just as I was about to give up and go home, Zhu Yiping came along. "Cui Hua told me you were here," he said. "Let me help you." He picked up the bucket. "Keep it upside down when you drop it. If you don't, it will float." He filled each of my buckets for me. He handed me his snake stick, and he carried them on the shoulder pole back to our hut, and I followed him. Cui Hua was waiting for us. She watched from the door. "You are almost a family now," she said. "You two look like a husband and wife." I was embarrassed. I could think of nothing to say. Yiping also reddened and put down the buckets and said, "The water is for both of you, Cui Hua. And I really don't fancy having 2 wives." It was perfect, and all 3 of us burst out laughing. Yiping visited us regularly after that. Sometimes he brought rice with him, and we cooked dinner together and talked late into the night. I learned he had only a middle school education, but studied classical Chinese literature and poetry on his own. We shared a love of poetry. I told him I'd brought several books of poetry with me, and he said he had done the same. He carried them with him after that, and I got out my large book of Tang Dynasty poetry, and we sat together long into the night, reading and reciting to each other. Some evenings, as he intoned the ancient poems of love and loneliness, I listened and followed his recitations with my finger on the page. I warmed at certain pages, and my heart quickened. I wondered if he was trying to speak directly to me through the poems, or if he merely loved the words on the page. One evening, he stood near the window, catching the last light of the day, holding a volume of poems in one hand and gesturing with the other as he read. "Last year, this very day, I found in this doorway her face and peach blossoms, mirroring each other's beauty. I wonder where the vase has gone. Only the peach blossoms still smile in the spring wind. My heart crept into my throat. I forgot the fatigue of the day and the hopelessness of life. His gentle, expressive voice lifted me and carried me away. I dreamed with my eyes wide open. I recited from memory. You ask me why I live on Green Mountain. I smile in silence with a quiet mind. Peach petals blow on mountain streams to earth and skies beyond humankind. Yiping watched me as I spoke. I was so embarrassed. I had to turn and face the window as my words spilled out. When I was finished, he began to recite from memory. Over a far-flung wooded plain, wreaths of smoke weave a screen. Cold mountains stretch into a belt of heart-rending green. The dusk invades the tower high, where someone sighs a longing sigh. He momentarily forgot the rest of the popular Li Bai poem. I waited while he rolled his eyes, trying to remember. I began to say them, and he remembered, and we finished the poem together. On marble steps she waits in vain, but to see birds fly back again. Where should she gaze to find her dear? She sees but stations far and near. Li Bai must have passed this way, he said. I cleared my throat, blushed, and told him, I agree. When we spoke about growing up, I learned that Yiping and I had shared similar experiences and had many common emotions and memories. We were lonely and homesick. Our souls had been tattered by the years. Our childhoods had been stolen. We comforted each other with our words. Yet we had to be cautious. We knew that in the past, passion was a political sentiment, a feeling we feared when we detected it in the voices or the faces of others. Passion was the private monopoly of those who persecuted others. We had experienced only sorrow, timidity, fear, frustration, and regret. But now, here, we sensed a passion in our hearts. We hardly dared look at each other for fear of bursting into flames. We were all embers beneath our skin, yet we kept a wall between us. We did not touch. We did not hold a glance too long. We knew when we stopped, it was not easy. But we knew, and we kept our distance. I looked forward to Yiping's visits. I combed my hair, washed my hands and face before he arrived. 翠华 laughed at my giddiness. I sensed she was growing jealous, and I'd read that jealousy always led to serious trouble. I decided to be even more careful about the time I spent alone with Yiping. One afternoon, when I was returning home from working in the fields, I heard crying and screaming. I ran the last short distance to our hut. Cuihua was in the midst of a circle of people, rolling around on the ground. Her fists doubled up like a baby's. She was screaming in a desperate, high-pitched voice. "What's wrong?" I asked the woman. Cuihua fell into the latrine, she said. In the mountain, rather than simply digging a hole in the ground for the latrine, as they did in the lowlands, they sank a large jar in the ground with the lip extending about half a foot above the surface. They placed 2 planks across the opening. Relieving yourself was a balancing act. You had to stand over the jar with 1 foot on each plank. If you shifted too much one way or another, the plank moved and you might lose your balance. I always found it frightening to use the device. Every time I squatted over the jar, I was afraid. Cuihua's long hair was caked with raw sewage. She was embarrassed about falling in and having to summon several villagers to fish her out. I found the scene comic and tragic at the same time. The villagers were all talking and laughing. Team leader Huang appeared and asked what was going on. He stepped to the center of the amused circle and said, "Cuihua, get up and wash yourself. Everyone knows you are a city girl. In the countryside, we get dirty now and then." "Get dirty now and then?" Cuihua screamed and struggled to her foot. "Look at me. This isn't dirt. This is the shit from your villagers. I can't live here anymore. I have no face here. I might as well die." "Oh, you're not going to die," Team Leader Huang said. "I want to go home to recover from this, Team Leader. I need 2 weeks. I deserve it. I've earned it." Team Leader Huang scowled at her, but was not unsympathetic. "Okay," he said. "You can have 1 week away." Cuihua broke into a big smile and hurried toward the river to wash. The next morning, as I left to join a group of women picking tea leaves higher in the mountains, Cuihua walked down the mountain carrying her bag, singing to herself. Several weeks each year, the villagers picked tea leaves. As I worked beside them, I saw how incomparably beautiful the mountains were. Thousands of red azaleas bloomed on the adjacent slopes. As the sun crossed the sky, the peaks and valleys in the distance shone as if they had been splashed with fresh blood. From ancient times, the tea from these mountains had been offered annually as a tribute to the empress. Traditionally, it was harvested only by women. I arose before sunrise and climbed with the others high into the mountains. each of us carried a bamboo basket to hold the leaves we picked. We gathered just the top 3 leaves of each branch of the bushes. Because of my dexterity, I was able to pick with both hands, and this amazed the others. We worked all day, but still gathered only about a pound of leaves each. After 5 days of this work, I became increasingly weak. I fell far behind the others, climbing up the tea bushes. I had to sit down and rest many times during the day. On Saturday, I stayed in bed rather than report for work. No one missed me. I stayed in bed the next day. I didn't cook for myself, and I grew even weaker. I ran out of water and was too ill to go to the well. I became dehydrated. I wondered when someone might notice my absence. Cui Hua was supposed to return on Sunday, but she didn't. And she didn't come back the next day. On Tuesday afternoon, Yiping stopped by. He hadn't seen me in over a week. He said he thought I'd gone home when Cui Hua left. He was shocked to see my condition. He hurried to the well to retrieve fresh water. I was so thirsty, I begged him to give me a sip before he boiled it. He comforted me and told me to wait. He built a fire in the stove, boiled the water for me, and cooked rice porridge. After I sipped some water, I managed to sit up in bed. I had little appetite, but he encouraged me to eat. He sat on the edge of the bed and spooned warm porridge into my mouth. When he touched my neck and looked into my eyes, I found my affection for him deepening. I had fallen in love. It was a wonderful feeling. At the same time, I knew that it was forbidden. After I'd eaten, he moved to a stool and read poems to me. He returned to his home that night and came back to care for me the next day. I was concerned that Cui Hua had not returned, but I valued the time I could spend with Yiping as he nursed me back to health. I could tell by the way he looked at me, by the selection of the poetry he read, by the way he lingered in the hut into the night, that without saying so directly, he had fallen in love too. I sat silently on the stool and watched and listened to him read. Notice the way he gently turned the page, the way he moved his arm or his fingers in making a particular point. The music of his voice enchanted me. He could read my heart in my eyes, and I read his feelings in his words. Yet, neither of us knew what to do next. A growing affection between us was doubly bad because we shared a common background, a black family. If we were discovered or even suspected of crossing forbidden lines of emotional attachment, our punishment was likely to be far more severe than that of children of the red families. We heard of the offspring of red families in the mountains who fell in love and married and settled down and lived like peasants. But they fully expected that as soon as the political winds shifted, they would be the first to return to the city. We knew that if we ever settled down in the mountains, all hope was lost of ever getting out. Yiping and I talked sometimes in the fanciful way about returning to our families and even going to college. We assured each other that our times in these mountains, contrary to what we'd been told, would someday end. Our real future, our actual lives, awaited us beyond the mountains, back in the city. We also knew, without saying so, that romance would surely spoil those dreams. We stayed close, yet also at guarded distance. With others around, we separated and blended in so as not to arouse suspicion. When party members were present, we didn't even look at each other. Yiping lived with two other educated youths from Wuhu. One day, after the harvest, when we didn't have to work, Cuihua and I visited them. After sharing tea, we decided to climb to the top of the highest peak in the surrounding mountains. We packed some steamed rice and poured a thermos of tea. And one of the boys borrowed an ancient hunting gun from one of the villagers. He said he thought he might be able to shoot a bird at some higher altitude, and we'd all feast on it. The ascent was more difficult than I expected. The path rose steeply after a short distance. There were places where we had to proceed on all fours. I was frightened by the heights. I fell behind. Yiping came back for me. He took my hand and helped me climb and advised, "Don't look down." I was petrified by the narrow, steep path. "I don't think I can continue," I told Yiping. "Of course you can," he calmly assured me. "Just hold my hand and you will be safe." And so I grasped his hand tightly and looked only at him and moved on. We climbed through a thin mist. Everything behind us was blotted out. When we reached the top of the mountain, the others were waiting for us. The view was truly breathtaking. We could see for miles and miles over the top of the clouds. It was an enchanted kingdom. Below us, on other peaks, we saw flowers in bloom, patches of pink and yellow and red. Birds were wheeling beneath us, unaware that we stood above them. There was no one in the world but the five of us. The sky above was blue, and the white clouds were huge and thick and floated past us like continents. No one spoke for a long time. Cui-Hua finally turned to say something to me, but stopped and gave me a forbidding look. I realized I was still holding Yiping's hand. I immediately let go and stepped away from him. We lay down in a circle, our heads nearly touching, and stared up at the endless blue. I closed my eyes and breathed the cool, limpid air. The only sound was a gentle breeze whistling over the rocks. Suddenly, there was a monstrous explosion nearby. I sat up, my heart pounding. "What's that?" I asked. The others laughed. One of the boys had fired the gun. "Look, how scared you are," Cui-Hua said. "Did you pee in your pants?" I blushed. "I'm not scared. I was just surprised." "If you're not scared," one of the boys said, "then you shoot the gun." He reloaded it and handed it to me. It was heavy, and I had difficulty lifting the barrel. He showed me where to put my hands and how to aim and pull the trigger. "There," he said, pointing at a bird floating below us. "Shoot the bird." But I was in no mood to kill any animal on this day. So I aimed at a cloud and closed my eyes and pulled the trigger. There was a loud blast, a flicker of fire, and a powerful recoil. I stumbled and fell over backward. I dropped the gun and screamed as though I had shot myself. "Hey, wow, you scared a lot of birds," one of the boys said, laughing. "But we won't have any for dinner." Scores of birds in the crags and rocks and bamboo took flight at the sound of the gun. A huge eagle flew up and circled us. It was so beautiful. Gliding through the sky, it soared and then swooped down and floated on invisible currents of wind. On the spot, I made up a poem and recited it. The eagle is flying over the mountain. The sun is sparkling like a jewel. We're standing on the top of the world. When the sun sets today, the eagle will rest in his nest, and we will return to a strange place far below us that is not our home. The others listened quietly. Yiping said, "Such sad words spoil a beautiful day." "Yimao, you are making me cry," Cui-Hua said. "We should forget our worries today." One of the boys added, "It's too melancholy, Yimao. How about this? At the top of the mountain, the eagle soars. Brave Wu Yimao fires a gun, scares away dinner, and pees in her pants. We'll go down the mountain with empty stomachs." We laughed. The somber mood created by my words dissolved. We sat together, our toes touching, and shared the rice and passed around the cup of hot tea. There were few words as we ate. We were deeply affected by our surroundings and our light-hearted and careless comradeship. "We'd better start down before it gets dark," Yiping said, as we finished the rice. Descending the mountain was even more difficult than climbing up. The mist and the clouds had thickened, and I could barely see the path beneath my feet. Once more, Yiping held my hand and encouraged me. When we reached the grassy slopes, we sat and slid part of the way down. By the time we arrived at our huts, it was dark. I was exhausted and tired and sore. The next day, Cuihua and I climbed to the terraced rice fields with a team of workers. We were so tired, we could not keep up with the others. Team leader Huang asked, "What were the 5 educated youths doing yesterday? You climbed to the top of the mountain without doing anything productive. You don't cut bamboo, you don't collect wood or mushrooms. Why in the world do you waste your days like that?" It would have been impossible to explain to him what we'd done, how we felt. So we responded with silence. End of chapter 50.